In the quiet town of Santa Fe, New Mexico, where adobe houses stood beneath the shadow of red mountains, and the desert winds carried the smell of piñon wood burning in stoves. Life was slow and predictable. Families gathered on Sundays in the old Spanish mission church. Children played baseball on dusty fields, and tourists wandered the narrow streets lined with galleries and turquoise jewelry shops. Among the children of this town was a boy named Ethan Morales, 7 years old with large brown eyes that always seemed to notice things adults overlooked. Ethan had grown up in a modest home on the edge of town with a backyard that opened onto the desert plain. His father Daniel worked as a carpenter while his mother Sophia taught art at the local elementary school. They were devoted parents, proud of their only child, though they often admitted Ethan was not like other boys his age. He was quiet, thoughtful, and sometimes, when the evening fell and the coyotes howled in the distance, he would stare into the horizon as if listening to voices no one else could hear. It began on a spring afternoon when Ethan was playing alone in the yard. Sophia called him inside for dinner, but instead of answering, he whispered something in a language she did not recognize. When she insisted, he turned to her with an intensity in his gaze far beyond his years and said, "I saw him. I saw the teacher when they nailed him to the wood." Sophia froze. She laughed nervously, thinking Ethan had picked up something from Sunday school. But when she asked, "Who are you talking about?" he replied calmly, "Jesus of Nazareth. I was there, Mama. My name was Eliab then. I watched it happen." At first she brushed it aside as a child's imagination. Yet the following days brought stranger revelations. Ethan began to describe in vivid detail the streets of Jerusalem. Narrow alleys, stone houses, the smell of olives and dust in the air. He spoke of Roman soldiers with bronze helmets, of the cries of people in the marketplace, of the heat of the sun on the day of the crucifixion. His parents listened in silence, exchanging glances that mixed fear and fascination. One night, Ethan woke screaming, his hands clenched tightly around the sheets. When Daniel rushed into his room, the boy sobbed, "I heard the hammer, Papa. I heard it again." They made him carry the wood, and he fell, and they laughed. His father, a man of faith, but also of reason, tried to comfort him. "It was only a dream," he said, but Ethan shook his head with stubborn certainty. "It wasn't a dream. I remember because I was there." The story spread quickly among family and neighbors. Sophia confided in her sister, who told a friend, and soon whispers circulated through the church community. Some dismissed it as childish fantasy, others as a sign from God. Father Thomas, the parish priest, came to visit. He asked Ethan gently about what he had seen. To his astonishment, the boy recited passages and prayers in Aramaic, a language no one had taught him. The priest, though cautious, admitted he could recognize fragments from old texts he had studied in seminary. From that moment, curiosity turned into concern. How could a 7-year-old child, raised in New Mexico, know words spoken 2,000 years ago in the Holy Land? The Morales family found themselves at the center of attention. Journalists from Albuquerque wanted interviews, local historians asked questions, and strangers began attending Sunday Mass just to catch a glimpse of the boy. But for Ethan, none of this mattered. To him, the memories were not a performance nor a game. They were heavy, often painful. At school, while other children practiced spelling words, he sketched crosses and Roman spears in the margins of his notebooks. He told his teacher once, "I don't like nails. They remind me of that day." Alarmed, the teacher called his mother, who could only shake her head, unable to explain. As weeks passed, the accounts became more precise. Ethan described the face of a man named Caiaphas, the garments of Roman centurions, the shape of the hill they called Golgotha. He even corrected details from a picture book in Sunday school, insisting, "That's not how it looked." The stones were darker, and the sky turned red when he died. His words sent shivers through the classroom, leaving his teachers speechless. By early summer, the situation had drawn the attention of Dr. Abigail Turner, a child psychologist from the University of New Mexico. Curious and skeptical, she traveled to Santa Fe to meet Ethan. She conducted gentle interviews, expecting to uncover signs of fantasy or suggestion. Yet what she encountered unsettled her. When she showed him old archaeological photographs of Jerusalem, Ethan pointed without hesitation. "That's the street where I ran with my father. That's where the Romans shouted." Dr. Turner noted in her report that the child displayed no signs of deception, nor did he seem to have been coached. His vocabulary and knowledge exceeded what one would expect of a child his age, and his emotional responses suggested genuine trauma. She concluded cautiously, whether these experiences are memories, imagination, or something unexplained, the psychological weight they carry for the boy is real. Meanwhile, Daniel and Sophia struggled between pride and fear. Was their son touched by divine mystery, or was he haunted by something they could not understand? At night, after Ethan had gone to bed, they whispered anxiously in the kitchen. "What if it's dangerous?" Sophia asked. "What if people come here wanting to use him?" Daniel clenched his jaw. "We protect him. Whatever this is, he's our son first." But fate had already begun to weave a larger story. For the boy from Santa Fe, whose small voice claimed to have witnessed one of history's most sacred and tragic events, could not remain hidden for long. By midsummer, the Morales family could no longer escape the attention. What had begun as murmurs in the pews of the mission church had swelled into something much larger. Cars with out-of-state license plates appeared on the streets of Santa Fe, their drivers asking neighbors for directions to the Morales house. Some came out of curiosity, others with notebooks and cameras convinced they were about to witness a miracle. Daniel tried to keep the house private, building a new fence around the yard, but reporters still lingered outside the gate. One evening, a television crew from Denver parked across the street, their camera lights glowing in the desert dusk. When Sophia stepped outside to tell them to leave, they pleaded, "Just 5 minutes with the boy." She shut the door without answering, her hands trembling. Inside, Ethan seemed only vaguely aware of the commotion. He spent hours sketching scenes in crayon, narrow streets, crowded with people, men in armor, a hill with 3 crosses silhouetted against a darkening sky. His drawings were rough, but their proportions and details startled those who saw them. Dr. Turner, reviewing the sketches, remarked, "This is not the imagination of a 7-year-old. These are consistent with reconstructions I've seen in academic journals." The attention reached the parish priest, Father Thomas, who found himself under pressure. Some parishioners begged him to declare Ethan a sign from God, while others feared the boy's visions were dangerous or even demonic. Father Thomas himself was torn. He believed in miracles, but was cautious of spectacle. Finally, he called the Archdiocese in Santa Fe, reporting the case in detail. Within weeks, representatives from the church arrived: Monsignor Alvarez, a calm man in his 60s with sharp eyes, and Sister Catherine, a historian who specialized in early Christian texts. They came not to bless or condemn, but to observe. One Sunday after Mass, they met privately with Ethan in the rectory. "Tell us about what you remember," Sister Catherine said gently. Ethan folded his hands, his gaze fixed on the floor. Then in a low voice, he began to describe the day of the crucifixion again. His words were simple, but the precision with which he spoke, the placement of the soldiers, the sound of the crowd, the path leading out of the city, left both visitors unsettled. When he whispered a short prayer in Aramaic, Sister Catherine felt the hair rise on her arms. Later, she admitted to Father Thomas, He recited an ancient phrase of blessing I've only ever seen in fragments of the Dead Sea Scrolls. The church officials kept their conclusions private, but their presence only fueled speculation. Local newspapers ran headlines, "Boy in Santa Fe recalls crucifixion." National media followed, spinning the story into debates about reincarnation, faith, and psychology. Some scholars denounced it as a hoax, while others defended it as a mystery worth studying. For Ethan, the sudden fame was confusing and painful. Strangers called his name in the street. Some knelt before him as if he were a prophet. Others shouted that he was cursed. He withdrew into himself, speaking less and clinging tightly to his mother's side. Sophia feared the weight of the world was crushing her child. Dr. Turner urged the family to step back from the public eye. "This boy needs space to be a child," she insisted. Yet her own curiosity deepened. She arranged a session with an archaeologist colleague, Professor Jonathan Hale, who had spent decades studying Jerusalem's first-century topography. Hale arrived with maps, sketches, and photographs. Spreading them on the Morales dining table, he asked Ethan simple questions. "Do you recognize any of this?" Ethan scanned the papers silently. Then he pointed at one diagram. "That's where the marketplace was," he said. His finger moved across the map to a slope, and that's where he fell. Right there. Professor Hale's brow furrowed. "This map is based on the most recent excavations, not published in any book for children," he murmured. How could he know? Hale pressed further, showing Ethan photographs of stone gates. The boy shook his head at one, then nodded at another. "That one. I ran through it with my father when the soldiers were coming." After the session, Hale confided to Dr. Turner that Ethan's descriptions matched theories still debated among archaeologists. Even trained scholars argue about these details. And yet this child speaks of them as if he walked there yesterday. As the weeks stretched on, the Morales family began to feel surrounded by forces they could not control. Faithful pilgrims left candles and flowers at their doorstep. A group of skeptics organized outside, accusing them of exploiting their son. Television producers offered money for exclusive rights to his story. Daniel grew angry, chasing reporters from his yard. "He's not your spectacle," he shouted. But at night, when the house was quiet, he wondered whether they were guardians of something far greater than themselves. One evening, Ethan sat at the kitchen table, his face pale. "Mama," he whispered, "they're coming again." "Who?" "Ethan," Sophia asked. "The soldiers. I can hear their boots. I don't want to see it anymore." Tears streamed down his face. Sophia embraced him, her heart breaking. She realized then that this was not a gift to her child, but a burden. Memories no 7-year-old should carry pressed down on him like a shadow he could not escape. Yet even as the family searched for peace, more strangers knocked at their door. Some carried cameras, some carried rosaries, and others carried questions that reached back across 2,000 years. And somewhere between the desert of New Mexico and the ancient stones of Jerusalem, the life of one small boy had become the bridge between past and present, a mystery that neither faith nor science could yet unravel. By autumn, the Morales home had become a reluctant crossroads where belief, skepticism, and curiosity collided. What had started as a family's private struggle was now a phenomenon followed by people across the country. Every morning, the mailbox overflowed with letters, some offering prayers, some demanding answers, and others laced with accusations. Evangelical pastors wrote to claim Ethan's visions as proof of prophecy. Skeptics accused the parents of manipulation. Spiritualists begged for a chance to commune with the boy. Sophia sorted through the letters with trembling hands, often throwing them away unread. "He's only 7, she whispered to Daniel. "He shouldn't carry all this. At school, Ethan's life unraveled. Children whispered behind his back, calling him Jesus Boy. Some dared him to perform miracles. Others avoided him entirely, afraid of his strange reputation. His teachers, sympathetic but overwhelmed, could not protect him from the stares. One day during art class, a classmate asked him, "If you were really there, what did his face look like?" Ethan paused, set down his brush, and answered simply, "Tired, but full of love." The room fell silent. Dr. Abigail Turner intensified her sessions with Ethan, this time using gentle therapeutic techniques to separate imagination from memory. Yet the more she probed, the more consistent his descriptions became. He recalled the weight of the desert sun, the roar of the crowd, the bitter taste of vinegar offered to a dying man. When she asked how he knew such things, he replied quietly, "Because I was Eliab, son of Josiah. I was small like me now. My father followed him. We believed." Turner recorded everything meticulously. Reviewing her notes late at night, she grew unsettled. "Either this boy has absorbed knowledge beyond his reach," she wrote, "or he is recounting experiences that cannot be explained by natural means." Meanwhile, Professor Jonathan Hale returned, bringing with him photographs from a recent excavation near Jerusalem's Western Wall. The images had not yet been released to the public. When Ethan glanced at them, he pointed to a particular stone arch. "That's where the women stood and cried," he said. Hale's heart pounded. His own hypothesis about the arch's use had not yet been published. He should not know this. Hale admitted almost in a whisper. The Vatican, too, had taken notice. Though no official statement was made, whispers reached Father Thomas Rome was watching. Monsignor Alvarez received discreet communications urging further observation. Sister Catherine corresponded with scholars overseas, testing Ethan's words against ancient manuscripts. Privately, she confided to Alvarez, "If this is genuine, it is one of the rarest phenomena the Church has ever confronted. But if it is not, then it is a cruel weight on a child's soul." As scrutiny intensified, so did Ethan's torment. The visions came not only at night, but in broad daylight. One afternoon at the dinner table, he dropped his spoon and covered his ears. "The hammer," he cried. "I hear it again." His body shook with sobs until his father carried him to bed. Daniel clenched his fists helplessly, his carpenter's hands trembling. "No child should know the sound of nails piercing flesh," he muttered. The family grew divided about how to respond. Daniel insisted on shielding his son, refusing all interview requests and threatening legal action against trespassers. Sophia, torn between fear and faith, wondered if denying the world would be denying God's purpose. Their arguments grew louder, echoing through the adobe walls of their small home. Ethan, sensitive and silent, absorbed every word. In the midst of this storm, a new figure appeared, Dr. Marcus Levin, a psychiatrist from Boston specializing in past life memory claims. Though controversial in his field, he was respected for his rigorous methods. Invited by Dr. Turner, he arrived skeptical, armed with psychological tests and recording equipment. Levin's approach was clinical. Sitting with Ethan in a quiet room, he asked direct questions. "When you say you were Eliab, how do you know you are him, and not simply imagining?" Ethan's response was calm. "Because when I close my eyes, I'm not here. I smell the dust. I feel my father's hand pulling me through the crowd. I can't stop it. It's not pretend, it's remembering." Levin noted physiological changes during these sessions. Ethan's pulse quickened, his pupils dilated, his voice sometimes deepened, as if weighted with sorrow. The boy's descriptions matched certain historical records too obscure for a child to invent. Yet Levin remained cautious. "Memory is fragile," he told the parents. "We cannot ignore the possibility of suggestion, even unconscious. But we also cannot deny what we cannot explain. As the investigations deepened, the Morales family began receiving threats. One night, graffiti appeared on their wall, fraud painted in red. Another evening, a stranger pounded on their door shouting that Ethan was possessed. Police patrols were arranged, but the family's sense of safety was shattered. In the face of hostility, something remarkable happened. Ethan grew protective of his parents. One night, seeing his mother weep in the kitchen, he placed a small hand on hers and said, "Don't be afraid, Mama." He forgave them. I can too. Sophia wept harder, struck by the paradox of her child comforting her with words drawn from an agony centuries old. By late autumn, the mystery had escalated beyond Santa Fe. National networks debated the case nightly. Theologians and psychologists clashed on television. Some saw in Ethan the echo of reincarnation, others the hand of divine providence, and still others the manipulation of impressionable minds. And through it all, Ethan continued to dream of bloodied stones, of voices crying, "Crucify him," of a sky that darkened at noon. He carried within him both the innocence of a 7-year-old boy in New Mexico and the sorrow of a witness to one of history's most sacred tragedies. The Morales family prayed each night for peace. But peace seemed to slip further away as forces greater than themselves closed in. For the world had decided Ethan was not just a boy, but a vessel of mystery, and no one, not even his parents, could predict where this path would lead. Winter descended on Santa Fe, crisp and sharp snow, dusting the adobe rooftops. Yet inside the Morales household, the cold came not from the air, but from the weight pressing upon them. The world no longer looked at Ethan as a child. It looked at him as evidence, as controversy, as proof. The Vatican's interest became visible. One morning, a black sedan pulled into the parish courtyard bearing 2 men in plain suits. They introduced themselves quietly to Father Thomas as envoys, not officials. Their instructions were to observe discreetly and to report back to Rome. They sat in the back pew during Mass silent, as shadows their notebooks, never leaving their hands. When Daniel learned of their presence, he bristled. My boy is not a case file for them to dissect. But Sophia urged patience. If this truly is from God, then we cannot turn away. The tension between husband and wife deepened into silence at the dinner table. Their conversations clipped their gazes heavy. Ethan felt every fracture in their voices. Meanwhile, the media frenzy had reached a fever pitch. Satellite trucks parked outside the school. Talk shows debated whether Ethan was a prophet or a fraud. One national anchor declared this child could be the most extraordinary religious case of the century or the greatest delusion. Daniel turned off the television in disgust, but Ethan sometimes overheard enough to shrink into himself. Dr. Marcus Levin pushed forward with psychological assessments, searching for cracks in the boy's narrative. But Ethan's answers remained steady, unchanging. He spoke of Eliab's life in ancient Jerusalem as naturally as describing recess on the playground. The details were too mundane to be fabricated. The smell of oil lamps in a stone house, the rhythm of a marketplace chant, the rough fabric of a tunic. Levin confessed to Dr. Turner, if this is fantasy, it is the most coherent, sustained fantasy I've ever documented. Professor Hale, the archaeologist, took matters further. He arranged for Ethan to look at 3-dimensional models of Jerusalem, reconstructed from satellite imaging and excavation data. Ethan navigated the maps with eerie confidence. Here, he said, pointing to a small alley. That's where the man with the water jar showed us the upper room. Hale's face paled. This interpretation aligned with contested biblical scholarship only a handful of experts debated behind closed doors. But the deeper the world pressed in, the more Ethan began to crack. He woke screaming in the night, crying that he could smell iron and blood. He covered his ears in the classroom, whispering, "The crowd won't stop shouting." Once during recess, he collapsed in the snow, muttering, "It's too loud, Mama. It's too loud." Sophia begged Dr. Turner, "Can't we stop this? Can't we make it go away?" Turner shook her head gently. The more pressure we put on him, the stronger the memories seem to surface. He needs peace, but peace is the one thing the world will not allow. The breaking point came in December. Father Thomas organized a private mass for the Morales family, hoping for calm. But word leaked. When they arrived at the church, a crowd had gathered: pilgrims, skeptics, reporters, all pushing forward with cameras and crosses. Some wept and begged Ethan to bless them. Others shouted that he was a liar. In the chaos, Ethan froze. His eyes glazed and he whispered, "It's happening again." He stumbled forward, hands outstretched as though walking on a road no one else could see. He's carrying the wood. They're pushing him. He's falling. His voice rose into a scream. "Stop! Don't hurt him!" Daniel swept him up in his arms, shielding him from the crowd. Sophia pressed her hands over her mouth, sobbing. Father Thomas tried to disperse the people, but the frenzy only grew. That night, images of the scene flashed across television screens worldwide. A child in his father's arms, screaming of crucifixion, surrounded by a crowd, divided between awe and outrage. After that day, the Morales house became a fortress. Police placed barricades at the end of their street. The family refused all visitors, save for Dr. Turner and Father Thomas. Inside silence ruled, broken only by Ethan's restless dreams. Yet the church did not retreat. Monsignor Alvarez and Sister Catherine returned this time, accompanied by one of the envoys from Rome. He introduced himself simply as Father Bellini, though his careful manner suggested deeper authority. In a private meeting, he asked Ethan questions in Latin and Greek. To their astonishment, the boy responded hesitantly, but with comprehension, as if the words stirred something half forgotten. Later, Alvarez confided to Father Thomas, "The boy cannot be ignored. Rome will want answers, but answers may demand more than this family can endure." For Daniel, that was the final straw. "They will not take my son. Not for their studies, not for their faith, not for their cameras. He's mine." His anger simmered into resolve. He began planning to move his family away, to vanish into another town where no one knew their names. Sophia feared he was right, yet part of her clung to the belief that Ethan's suffering carried meaning beyond their understanding. And Ethan himself, caught between two worlds, burdened with visions too heavy for his years, began to withdraw. He spent hours staring out the frost-glazed window, whispering prayers no one taught him. "Forgive them," he murmured. "They don't know." The world outside clamored louder, the church pressed closer, and the media grew hungrier. But inside the quiet rooms of the Morales home, one question echoed above all. How long could a child bear the weight of 2,000 years of memory before breaking entirely? By January, the Morales family lived in shadows. Curtains stayed drawn, phones unplugged, and Daniel refused to open the door unless he recognized the voice outside. The once cheerful home now felt like a bunker. Sophia cooked in silence. Daniel repaired furniture late into the night, and Ethan wandered from room to room like a restless ghost. The pressure from Rome intensified. Father Bellini returned with an official letter, its language careful but unmistakable. The Vatican wished to bring Ethan to a private facility in Italy for spiritual care and study. The offer came with promises of protection, education, and anonymity. Yet Daniel's jaw tightened as he read. "They want to take him away from us," he growled. "They call it care, but it's captivity." Sophia pleaded for calm. "Maybe they can help him. Maybe this is bigger than us." But Daniel slammed his fist against the table. He's our son, not their relic. The fracture between husband and wife deepened into a chasm. Ethan, sitting in the corner, absorbed every word. "If I go," he whispered, "will the soldiers follow me there too?" His parents fell silent, unable to answer. Meanwhile, Dr. Turner and Dr. Levin debated fiercely. Turner insisted on rest therapy and distance from the media. Levin, though cautious, argued that Ethan's case was unprecedented. If documented thoroughly, he told them this could change how science understands memory trauma, perhaps even consciousness itself. Turner snapped back. "He's not your experiment, Marcus. He's a child drowning in two worlds." The tug of war grew unbearable. Daniel began to act on his plan. He withdrew cash-sold tools quietly and spoke to a cousin in Arizona about a place they might stay. But fate moved faster than he did. One night, a vision struck Ethan with a force greater than any before. He was asleep when the cries began, low moans, at first then sharp piercing wails. He thrashed against the sheets, shouting, "The sky is black, the ground shakes, he's gone." Daniel and Sophia rushed to his side, but Ethan's body convulsed. His small fists clenched as though gripping invisible earth. When the fit ended, he lay trembling, his voice hoarse. "It's finished," he whispered. The veil tore. "I saw it." His words mirrored biblical accounts Daniel vaguely remembered from sermons. Yet Ethan spoke them with the terror of an eyewitness. Dr. Turner arrived the next morning exhausted but determined. She recorded Ethan's recollection in detail. He described the quake, the splitting of stone walls, the cries of priests in the temple. Turner's rational mind strained for explanations, perhaps fragments of Sunday school lessons, stories overheard, but the precision of Ethan's account gnawed at her. That week, Professor Hale returned from Jerusalem with startling news. A recently uncovered manuscript fragment hinted at the presence of a boy named Eliab, son of Josiah, mentioned briefly among followers of the Nazarene. The fragment was fragile, incomplete, but the name was there. Hale laid the photograph on the Morales table, his voice shaking. "If this is authentic, it could be the first written trace of the child Ethan claims to have been." Daniel stared unbelieving while Sophia crossed herself, a tear streaming. For Ethan, the sight seemed to quiet something inside him. He touched the image gently. "That's me," he said simply, then walked away to his room. The discovery only drew more attention. Scholars clamored for access. Journalists speculated about reincarnation prophecy, divine proof. The Morales house became the epicenter of a storm that showed no sign of ending. One evening, after another barrage of reporters outside their gate, Daniel announced his decision. "We leave tomorrow. I won't let them break him." He packed bags in silence, his face carved with resolve. Sophia argued until her voice cracked. "You can't outrun the world, Daniel. They'll find us wherever we go." That night, Ethan crept into the kitchen where his parents sat in weary silence. He placed his small hands on theirs. "Don't fight," he said softly. He forgave them. We have to forgive too. The words spoken with solemn clarity pierced the air like a sermon. Daniel lowered his head, overcome, while Sophia wept quietly. Yet forgiveness could not shield them from what came next. The following morning, as they prepared to leave, two black sedans blocked their driveway. Father Bellini stepped out, flanked by men whose presence was less priestly than official. He spoke with a calm authority. "Mr. Morales, Mrs. Morales Rome requests the boy's presence. I urge you to reconsider, for his sake and for the church." Daniel's grip tightened on Ethan's shoulder. No, he stays with us. Bellini's gaze softened, yet his words carried weight. History has laid its hand on your child. You may shelter him for a time, but you cannot hold back the tide forever. With that, he turned and left, but the message lingered. The world would not release them. That night, Ethan sat awake, staring at the desert moon. His voice drifted into the quiet. I don't want to remember anymore. He looked at his mother. Can I let it go? Sophia stroked his hair, whispering through tears. Yes, my love. You can let it go. Whether the boy could truly surrender the weight of centuries was uncertain, but in that fragile moment between desert silence and eternal memory, the family clung to hope that release was possible. Spring arrived in Santa Fe with the scent of blooming desert sage, and with it a quiet shift inside the Morales household. For the first time in months, the air felt less heavy, though no one could explain why. The phone calls slowed, the reporters dwindled, and the barricades came down. Somehow, as swiftly as the world had swarmed their lives, it seemed to lose interest. But within the walls of their modest home, the greatest change was in Ethan. The boy who once woke screaming at visions of crosses and soldiers now slept more peacefully. The memories that had haunted him with relentless clarity began to dim like lanterns, flickering out in the wind. Dr. Turner noticed it first. During a session, she asked Ethan to describe the temple he had once spoken of with detail that had stunned her. He frowned, searching for words. It was big, he said finally, then shrugged, distracted by a toy car on her desk. For the first time, Turner felt relief. The past is loosening its grip, she wrote in her notes. Sophia clung to her son every chance she had, fearful that each day's forgetfulness might erase something sacred, but grateful that the child she knew was returning. You're laughing again, she told him one morning as he chased their dog across the yard. Ethan looked up at her, puzzled. Did I stop Daniel, hardened by months of strain, soften too? He no longer spoke of fleeing nor of fighting. Instead, he poured his energy into restoring the old wooden table where the family gathered each evening. We've been given a second chance, he said quietly to Sophia. Let's not waste it. Still not everything vanished. At times, fragments surfaced, brief and fleeting like echoes. One evening, as they watched the sunset over the desert hills, Ethan whispered, It turned dark like this once in the middle of the day. But when Sophia asked what he meant, he blinked and changed the subject. Professor Hale, returning from Jerusalem, shared that the manuscript fragment mentioning Eliab, son of Josiah, had been authenticated by independent experts. The world's scholars debated it furiously, but the Morales family received the news with quiet resignation. Let them argue, Daniel said. We have our boy back. Father Thomas, too, reflected on the mystery from his pulpit. Perhaps God allowed us a glimpse through a child, he told his congregation. Not to give us certainty, but to remind us that faith is not built on proof, but on love. His words resonated in the small church, though he avoided mentioning Ethan by name. The Vatican's envoys eventually withdrew their interest, fading as Ethan's visions did. Monsignor Alvarez left behind only a letter urging the family to guard their child's heart above all else. Sister Catherine, before departing, kissed Ethan's forehead and whispered, Whether you remember or not, you were a witness. As weeks turned into months, Ethan's drawings shifted from crosses and stone arches to rockets, superheroes, and dinosaurs. He spoke more of friends at school than of voices from the past. By summer, the boy who had once been consumed by visions of ancient Jerusalem seemed at last simply 7 years old. And yet for those closest to him, the memory of those months would never fade. Sophia carried in her heart the sound of her child praying in a language lost to centuries. Daniel remembered the weight of holding his son as he screamed about nails and hammers. Dr. Turner and Professor Hale, though, bound by professionalism, would forever recall the inexplicable knowledge spoken from a child's lips. On Ethan's 8th birthday, the family gathered in the yard, surrounded by laughter balloons and neighbors who had finally stopped whispering. As the sun set over the Sangre de Cristo Mountains, Sophia watched her son blow out candles and thought he is free. But later that night, as she tucked him into bed, Ethan stirred. "Mama," he murmured half asleep. "I remember a man carrying wood." He looked at me. He smiled even though he was hurt. Sophia froze, her breath caught in her throat. She stroked his hair gently until he drifted fully into sleep. Then she sat beside him, in the dim light, tears sliding silently down her cheeks. She did not know if the memory was fading or returning, if it was a fragment or simply a dream. What she did know was that their lives had been forever altered. They had stood at the crossroads of history and mystery, caught between faith and doubt, love and fear. And in the center of it all was a boy who had carried 2,000 years of sorrow and somehow remained whole. For the world, the story of Ethan Morales would remain unresolved, whispered in theological debates, cited in psychological case studies, retold in hushed tones among pilgrims. But for his family, the truth was simpler, more profound. He was their son, a child of New Mexico, a child of wonder, a child who had once spoken with the voice of the past and who now laughed with the freedom of the present. And as the desert night settled, the Morales home filled not with visions of soldiers or shadows of crosses, but with the gentle breathing of a sleeping boy. At last, just a boy.